A few years ago, I was in Morocco with a small humanitarian aid group, and night after night, we were invited to share meals at different town officials' homes. These weren't simple dinners, they were feasts. Through our interpreter, I learned something interesting. In that culture, a guest could ask for anything. Yes, literally anything, and the host would provide it. And so I jokingly asked, what would happen if I requested something ridiculous, something like a Lamborghini? The interpreter looked at me very seriously and said, they would find a way to get you one. The shame of having a guest at your home whose needs weren't met would be absolutely unbearable for them. These families were giving me and my group the best food. They were giving us their finest dishes, their most expensive ingredients, not because they had to, but because that's what hospitality meant to them. A guest at your table wasn't just someone to feed, they were someone to honor. We live in a culture where meals have become rushed and isolated, but what if we can learn something about life and authentic community from sharing a meal together? Today on More to Life, we'll discover how one controversial dinner 2,000 years ago reveals the power of radical hospitality. In Canada, we've become experts at being polite at a distance. We smile, we hold doors open, we say sorry, I think more than any other nation on earth. But when it comes to actually inviting people into our lives, inviting them into our homes, around our tables, we hesitate. We keep our struggles private. We keep our relationships mostly surface level. And we keep our dinner tables reserved for family or really, really close friends. Research shows that a strong sense of community is linked to better mental health, increased life satisfaction, and greater resilience during difficult times. And yet, despite living in one of the world's most diverse and connected countries, many Canadians report feeling lonely and disconnected. Our Canadian politeness, while nice, sometimes prevents us from extending hospitality in a genuine way to new people. We worry about, imposing on others, about having our lives perfectly together and assume people prefer to be left alone with their struggles. But here's what's interesting about human connection. Belonging isn't just a nice feeling. It's a fundamental human need that affects our mental, physical, and social health and well-being. And so in Canada, we have an incredible amount of diversity. We live alongside people from dozens of countries, various faith backgrounds, and completely different life experiences. And every day in our workplaces, neighborhoods, and communities, we encounter people who might be struggling, even with loneliness. They might be struggling with financial stress, relationship problems, or simply the challenge of building a community in a new place. Yet we often miss opportunities to extend hope and community. One of the most powerful ways to create authentic community is actually very simple. We already talked about it. It's through sharing a meal together. Research confirms that those who eat socially more often feel happier and more satisfied with life. But meals is just one example of how we can create spaces for genuine connection. Yet many of us believe that meaningful relationships require that our lives need to be perfect somehow before we can welcome other people into it. But what if this assumption is wrong? Well, about 2,000 years ago, a tax collector named Levi experienced the most radical act of inclusion imaginable. His encounter with a man named Jesus didn't happen in a synagogue or through a formal religious ceremony. It happened around a dinner table in his own home, with the most unlikely collection of guests anyone could have imagined at that time. And this controversial meal reveals something profound about how invitation creates belonging and how simple acts of hospitality can break down barriers that keep us isolated from each other. Capernaum was a bustling fishing town on the shores of the Sea of Galilee in Israel. Tax collectors in first century Palestine weren't just unpopular, they were despised. They worked for the Roman government, collecting taxes from their own people, often adding personal fees on top of what Rome required. They were seen as traitors, as thieves, and collaborators with the enemy. Levi, also called Matthew, was one of these tax collectors. Luke chapter 5, verse 27 tells us, "Later, as Jesus left the town, he saw a tax collector named Levi sitting at his tax collector's booth. 'Follow me and be my disciple,' Jesus said to him." I want you to picture this moment for a second. Jesus, a respected rabbi followed by crowds, walks up to the most hated man in town and offers him an invitation that no one else would have expected. He says, "Follow me." He doesn't say, "Clean up your life first," or "Prove yourself worthy." He just simply says, "Follow me." Verse 28 says, "So Levi got up, left everything, and followed him." To follow in the footsteps and become an apprentice of a rabbi was one of the highest honors at that time. An invitation like this would show to you and everyone else your worth and value as a person. You are seen as someone with enormous potential if a rabbi invited you to follow in their footsteps and learn from them. But here's where the story gets interesting. Verse 29 tells us, "Later, Levi held a banquet in his home with Jesus as the guest of honor. Many of Levi's fellow tax collectors and other disreputable sinners also ate with them." Notice what Levi did immediately after experiencing acceptance from Jesus. He didn't wait until he had his life completely together. He didn't spend months studying to become a better person first. He threw a party. He opened his home. He prepared a feast and invited everyone he knew who needed what he had just experienced. Something called radical acceptance. This wasn't a small, quiet dinner. The word banquet here suggests a very large celebration. Levi invited his colleagues. He invited other tax collectors, people the religious community at that time had written off as basically hopeless. He created space at his table for the excluded, for the judged, and the people religious leaders at that time would never be caught associating with. When someone offers you acceptance before demanding change, it creates space for transformation. It creates a space for change that criticism never could. But verse 30 reveals the controversy this created. It says, "But the Pharisees and their teachers of religious law complained bitterly to Jesus' disciples. 'Why do you eat with such scum?'" That's pretty harsh language. In first century Jewish culture, sharing a meal with someone was basically a declaration of acceptance and equality. When you ate with someone, you weren't just eating some good food together. You were saying they belonged at your table. They belonged in your community, in your life. The Pharisees, the religious leaders, weren't just upset about the company Jesus kept. They were outraged that he was extending full acceptance to the people they believed should be excluded. Jesus' response in verses 31 and 32 reveals the heart of his mission. It says, Jesus answered them, "Healthy people don't need a doctor, sick people do. I have come to call not those who think they are righteous, but those who know they are sinners and need to repent." This response reveals something interesting about how transformation happens and how we can extend hope to others. Let me share with you just 3 principles that we can take from this controversial dinner party. Number 1, invitations create belonging before behavior change. Jesus didn't wait for Levi to prove himself worthy before offering acceptance. He invited Levi to follow him while Levi was still sitting at his tax collector's booth, still actively participating in a very corrupt system. The invitation came first. The transformation came after. This challenges our natural instinct to accept people before they demonstrate change. We think, well, okay, I'll invite them once they get their life together, or they need to prove that they're serious about change before I invest time and effort into them. But Jesus demonstrates the opposite. Acceptance creates the space and facilitates a change in someone's life. A recent study by the Barilla Group called The Power of Togetherness. A new study reveals shared meals as the key to well-being and happiness across the globe. That article shows that shared meals promote happiness and positive emotions, with the highest frequency of shared meals occurring actually in Italy, where 74% of adults report 6 or more meals weekly. When people feel accepted and included, they naturally want to live up to that acceptance or expectations. Think about your own life. When have you experienced the most growth? It was probably in relationships where you felt safe enough to be honest about your struggles, where someone believed in you before you believed even in yourself. That's the power of invitation first and transformation second. Here's point number 2. Meals break down social barriers naturally. There's something uniquely powerful about sharing food. In Morocco, I learned that hospitality around a table creates instant community across cultural and language barriers. Jesus understood this principle perfectly. There's something about the vulnerability of eating together, the relaxed conversation and environment, the shared experience, the laughs that break down walls in ways that a formal interaction never could. Levi's banquet brought together people who would never interact in normal circumstances. Tax collectors and fishermen, religious seekers and social outcasts, all sharing the same table together, the same food, the same experience of acceptance. The meal itself became a bridge across social backgrounds. As Canadians, we have opportunities every day to break down barriers through simple acts of hospitality. Your coworker who immigrated from Syria, your neighbor who's going through a divorce, your classmate who seems isolated. What if your invitation to just simply share a meal together, it could be as simple as lunch one random day, could be life-changing for this person. Point number 3, hospitality heals both the giver and receiver. Here's what's beautiful about Levi's story. He became the host. The man who had been excluded from community became the one creating community for others. This experience of acceptance transformed him into someone who extended acceptance. Levi's banquet wasn't just about helping other outcasts feel accepted. It was about Levi. It was about him stepping into a new identity as someone who not just accepts belonging, but creates belonging for others. The act of hosting transformed him from someone who took from his community into someone who gave to his community. This is the genius of Jesus' approach to extending hope. He didn't just rescue individuals from isolation. He equipped them to become agents of inclusion for others. When you invite someone into your life, you're not just solving their problem of loneliness. You're creating opportunities for them to become the kind of person who creates belonging for others. The Pharisees saw this dinner party as scandalous because it challenged their entire system of exclusion. They had created categories of worthy and unworthy, insider and outsider, who was to be accepted and who was unacceptable. Jesus' willingness to share meals with tax collectors and sinners threatened their power structure because it demonstrated that everyone has value. Everyone deserves acceptance. Everyone belongs at the table. But Jesus wasn't being naive about sin. Let's not make that mistake, or minimizing the need for change. His comment about being a doctor for sick people reveals that he knew exactly who he was dining with and what they needed. The difference was his method. Healing through acceptance rather than exclusion. Transformation was brought through an invitation rather than simply condemning as the Pharisees did. What if the most important table you could be invited to is the one Jesus offers in Revelation chapter 3, verse 20? It says, "Look, I stand at the door and knock. If you hear my voice and open the door, I will come in and we will share a meal together as friends." This isn't about religion or rules. It's about relationship. Jesus wants to sit at your table. He wants to participate in your life, regardless of what you've done or where you've been. Notice that Jesus doesn't force his way in or demand entry. He simply knocks and he waits for a response. He waits for your response. He offers the same patient invitation he extended to Levi. Acceptance, relationship, community, belonging. He's not interested in you fixing yourself first before he will associate with you. When you accept that invitation, you discover what Levi discovered. Being fully known and fully accepted transforms everything. It changes how you see yourself, how you relate to others, and how you understand your purpose in this world. The same acceptance that transformed a despised tax collector into a beloved disciple is available to you today.
In life's storms, we need a beacon. HopeStudy.ca shines Bible truth like Peggy's Cove Lighthouse, steady, bright, and free. From the Rockies to the Maritimes, Canadians are finding hope online. Will you visit HopeStudy.ca and let grace guide you home?
So how can we apply this story about meals and hospitality into our modern Canadian context? Let me offer 3 practical questions that will help you identify opportunities to extend hope through radical hospitality. And here's number 1. Who in your life needs an invitation more than advice? Jesus didn't lecture Levi about the evils of tax collecting. He simply said, "Follow me." Sometimes the most helpful thing you can offer someone isn't solutions to their problems, but inclusion and spending time with them. Think about the people around you. Who seems isolated? Who's going through a difficult transition? Who might be struggling with loneliness in a culture that values privacy? Often these people don't need you to fix their problems. They need to know they belong somewhere. This is especially important in our multicultural context. Someone who immigrated here recently might have professional success, but feel totally culturally isolated. A neighbor going through a divorce might have financial stability, but desperately needs community. A classmate might seem confident, but they might be struggling with belonging. And your invitation doesn't need to be elaborate. Start with something simple like, hey, would you like to grab some lunch sometime? Or we're having some people over on Sunday to watch the game, if you'd like to join us. Maybe it's inviting someone to your workout routine, or maybe a book club, or even just a walk around the neighborhood. The power isn't in the sophistication of what you offer, but in your invitation itself. For introverts, remember that creating community doesn't require being the life of the party. Some of the most meaningful connections happen in quiet conversations, one-on-one, over coffee, tea breaks, or maybe just a small gathering. Your willingness to create space for someone else might be exactly what they need. Question number 2. What social barriers could intentional inclusion break down? The Pharisees created clear categories about who was acceptable and who wasn't. But Levi's banquet brought together the most unlikely collection of people imaginable. What if your dinner table could become a place where different worlds collide in beautiful ways? Look at your current social circles. Are they diverse? Do they include people from different backgrounds, cultures, life stages, or experiences? If everyone at your table looks like you and thinks like you, you might be missing opportunities. I heard someone this week say that one of the first casualties of living in an echo chamber is empathy. This doesn't mean forcing artificial relationships. It means being intentional about including people who might enrich your community while benefiting from the acceptance you can offer. Maybe it's inviting the elderly neighbor who lives alone, the international student from your school, the single parent from your child's class, or the colleague who seems to eat lunch by themselves. Finally, question number 3. How might Jesus' invitation to share a meal with you transform your understanding of belonging? The ultimate example of hospitality is found in Jesus' invitation to relationship. He offers to sit at your table, not after you get your life together, but exactly where you are right now. Many people avoid exploring faith because they feel they need to fix their problems first, or understand theological concepts, or even start attending church regularly. But Jesus' invitation is simpler than that. He just says, I want to share a meal with you. He simply wants a relationship. That's what that means. When you accept that invitation, you simply say, Jesus, yes, I want to know what it means to have you at my table. You will begin to discover the acceptance and belonging that Levi discovered, and that inspires you in turn to become someone who creates belonging for others. And so, what if you're one invitation away from experiencing that? Would you take it?
Hope Channel Canada is more than a TV channel. It's a movement of hope, health, and salvation. Lives are being changed each day through our programs. You can become an agent of hope in Canada, whether through prayer, volunteering, or a donation. Your actions will create ripples of change. Like threads woven into a tapestry, your small contribution helps to build something beautiful. So visit agentsofhope.ca or call 1-855-4-HOPE-TV to get involved. Thank you for your support.
A few months ago, I met an old friend for lunch who I hadn't seen in years. We'd stay connected on social media, but you know how that goes. You see the highlight reel, but sometimes you miss the real story. When we sat down to talk over lunch, I expected to catch up on career updates and family milestones, but something about sharing that meal together broke down the barriers built up over time. Maybe it was the relaxed atmosphere or the fact that we weren't rushing to get somewhere else. Our conversations quickly moved beyond surface level updates. He began to open up about struggling at his job, feeling undervalued and questioning his career direction. He shared about tensions in his marriage and how isolated he felt, even though his life looked successful from the outside. What struck me wasn't just his honesty, but how natural it felt for both of us to have that conversation. Something about sitting across from each other, sharing food, created space for vulnerability that a text message exchange never could have. By the end of lunch, we weren't just old friends who had caught up again. We were two people who experienced genuine community. This is exactly what happened at Levi's banquet. Jesus' invitation to one tax collector became a gathering of people who enjoyed community. The acceptance offered to one outcast created a model for including all outcasts. Today, we've discovered how Jesus' controversial meal reveals key principles about extending hope through community. First, we learned that invitation creates belonging before behavioral change. Jesus invited Levi to follow him while he was still sitting as a tax collector at his booth. Acceptance provides the foundation where authentic transformation can grow. Second, we saw that shared experiences break down social barriers really naturally. There's something about creating space for authentic connection that builds bridges across cultural, economic, and social barriers. Community becomes the bridge that formal interactions can't provide. And third, we discovered that inclusion leads both to healing of the giver and the receiver. Levi's experience of acceptance transformed him into someone who created acceptance for others as well. When you extend community, you're not just helping others, you're building the kind of belonging you need too. What if the simple act you think is insignificant could be the beginning of someone's transformation? And perhaps the most important invitation you could accept today is the one Jesus offers to share life with Him. He stands at the door of your life, not waiting for you to get everything together first, but ready to enter your world exactly where you are. And so my challenge to you is this: stop waiting for the perfect moment or the ideal circumstances. Look for someone who needs to feel that community, like they belong, and make the invitation to share a meal together. Because there's more to life than staying isolated. There's the experience of authentic community. And it all starts with one simple invitation.